"This funeral is a sham," the little girl told the millionaire, "and when they find out why she said it, everyone is shocked." Let me know what you thought of this story by giving it a rating from 0 to 10 and tell me what city you're listening from. I'd love to know if you enjoyed my story and get to know you better, so please follow my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The heavy silence of Oakwood Cemetery in Asheville was broken by the muffled sound of earth falling on the mahogany casket. Arthur Builder, at 52, tightly held the handful of rich Carolina soil, his trembling fingers struggling to find the strength to complete the farewell ritual for his father, Edward Builder. The tears, streaming down the businessman's weathered face, contrasted with the rigidity that had always defined his personality, shaped by decades of a harsh upbringing under the command of the very man who now lay in that coffin. The Builder family had gathered in full force for the funeral. Eleanor, Edward's second wife, wept dramatically at 58, her black-gloved hands clutching a lace handkerchief. Beside her, Catherine, Arthur's wife of 25 years, maintained the composure typical of a woman accustomed to the social protocols of Asheville's elite. The oldest employees of Builder Construction were also present, showing the respect Edward had earned over 4 decades of building houses and edifices throughout the western North Carolina region. Father Michael was finishing the prayers when a shrill cry cut through the stuffy April afternoon air. A small girl, no more than 4 years old, ran barefoot between the graves, her clothes torn and smudged with dirt. Her brown hair was messy, and her large eyes shone with a desperate urgency. "Don't bury him! Don't bury him!" shouted Lily, her thin arms flailing as she ran towards the group of mourners. "The coffin's empty! There's no one in there!" The impact of the child's words was immediate. Eleanor let out a moan and nearly fainted, supported by 2 relatives. Arthur felt the blood freeze in his veins, while murmurs of indignation began to spread among those present. How dare a ragged child interrupt a funeral with such absurd accusations? "Get out of here, girl!" Eleanor shouted, regaining her composure with a sudden fury. "How dare you desecrate my husband's funeral with these lies?" But Lily was not intimidated. With the determination that only childhood innocence can provide, she planted herself firmly in front of the casket and pointed with her small finger. "I saw him. I saw old man Edward at Miss Connie's boarding house. He was talking to a woman about money." Arthur felt his legs weaken. He vaguely knew the child. He'd seen her collecting cans and cardboard in the downtown streets with an old woman everyone called Grandma Rose. But why would a homeless girl know his father? And why would she invent such a specific story? "When was this, little girl?" Arthur asked, ignoring the disapproving looks from his family. "The day before yesterday, on Monday," Lily answered without hesitation. "He was thin, with a long beard, but it was him. I recognize him because he always gave me a quarter when I passed by his big company." Arthur's heart raced. His father had supposedly died on Tuesday, found at home by Eleanor. How could a child have seen him on Monday if he was already dead? The doubt that started as a thin thread in his mind quickly spun into a web of suspicion. "Arthur, don't listen to this child," Eleanor intervened, her voice laden with poorly disguised desperation. "She's confused, traumatized. Homeless people always make up stories to get attention." But something in the certainty of Lily's eyes struck a sensitive chord in Arthur's chest. Throughout his life, he had learned to read people in business, and this child was not lying. There was a transparency in her gaze that contrasted sharply with the sudden agitation that overcame Eleanor and some other relatives. "Open the coffin," Arthur said suddenly, his voice echoing through the cemetery like a thunderclap. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor turned pale, pressing a hand to her chest as if she might faint again. The funeral home employees glanced at each other nervously, unsure how to proceed with such an unusual request. "Arthur, this is absurd," Catherine protested. You're going to desecrate your own father's funeral because of the words of a street child? If there's nothing to hide, there's no problem in checking, Arthur replied, his determination growing by the second. The businessman who had built a construction empire on the meticulous verification of every detail could not ignore such blatant evidence. After 20 minutes of heated discussion and threats from some relatives to abandon the funeral, Arthur convinced the funeral director to open the casket. With trembling hands, the men removed the screws from the mahogany lid as the family watched in tense silence. What they found inside changed everything. There was no body at all, only stones wrapped in old newspapers and a few bricks to give the coffin weight. The shock was so brutal that several people had to lean on nearby tombstones. Eleanor let out a sharp cry and ran off between the graves, followed by some relatives trying to catch her. Arthur stood paralyzed, staring into the empty interior of the coffin that should have held his father's mortal remains. His rational business mind tried to process the impossible reality unfolding before his eyes. If Edward wasn't dead, where was he? Why had he staged his own death? And more importantly, how many other lies had his family built over the years? Lily approached him and tugged on the sleeve of his black suit. "I told you he wasn't in there," she said with the devastating simplicity of children. Old man Edward was at the boarding house, talking about a debt with loan sharks. He seemed really scared. At that moment, under the strong afternoon sun, among century-old tombstones and the scent of wilting flowers, Arthur Builder understood that his life had just been turned upside down. And all because of the words of a 4-year-old girl whom no one took seriously, but who had just proven to be the only honest person at the entire Sham funeral. Miss Connie's boarding house was on a narrow street in the River Arts district, where the smell of diesel from the buses mixed with the aroma of home-cooked meals wafting from open windows. Arthur parked his silver pickup truck in front of the humble establishment, an old 2-story building with peeling paint and a wooden sign swaying in the wind. Beside him, Lily nervously clutched a rag doll she had gotten from Grandma Rose, her big eyes watching every movement on the street. 3 days had passed since the bizarre funeral, and Arthur hadn't slept properly since. Eleanor had disappeared from the city, claiming she needed time to recover from the shock. But her sudden flight only deepened the suspicions that grew like weeds in the businessman's mind. Catherine had initially supported him, but now she showed clear signs of irritation with her husband's obsession with chasing clues based on a street child's words. "It's there, Uncle Arthur," Lily said, pointing to a second-floor window. "It was in that room I saw old man Edward talking to the woman with the colored hair." Arthur had decided to call the girl his niece after discovering, through conversations with Grandma Rose, that Lily was the daughter of a young woman named Amelia who had briefly worked at the construction company years ago. The pieces were beginning to fit together in a disturbing way, creating a puzzle he feared completing. Miss Connie, a robust 65-year-old woman with a floral apron always tied at her waist, greeted them at the door with surprise. She knew Arthur by sight. After all, everyone in Asheville knew who owned the city's largest construction company, but she never expected to see him at the door of her modest boarding house. "Mr. Builder, what an honor to have you here," she said, drying her hands on her apron. "How can I help you?" "Miss Connie, I need to know about a guest you had here on Monday. A thin man in his 70s with a long graying beard," Arthur explained, trying to keep his voice steady despite the anxiety growing in his chest. The landlady's face immediately clouded over. "Look, Mr. Builder, I don't usually talk about my guests' lives. It's a matter of privacy, you understand. Please, Miss Connie, it's my father, Edward Builder," Arthur insisted, ignoring the woman's surprised look. "There's a very complicated situation, and I need to find him urgently." The revelation made Miss Connie visibly uncomfortable. She looked at Lily, who was hiding behind Arthur's legs, and then back at the businessman, with an expression that mixed pity and concern. "Your father is sick, Mr. Builder," Very sick, she finally said, lowering her voice as if afraid of being overheard. He arrived here 2 weeks ago, paying daily in cash, no ID, asking for no one to know he was here. Arthur's heart pounded. Is he still here? He is, room 7 at the back, but sir, he's not right in the head. He talks to himself, delirious about debts, about hurting his family. Sometimes he cries all night. Arthur felt his legs tremble. He climbed the creaking wooden staircase with Lily clinging to his hand, each step echoing like a hammer on his conscience. He had spent the last 3 days imagining confronting his father, demanding explanations, screaming out all the confusion he felt. But now, standing before the door of room 7, he could only feel a deep fear of discovering truths he might prefer not to know. The door was ajar. Arthur pushed it open slowly and saw a scene that would be etched in his memory forever. Edward was sitting on a small bed, his back hunched and his hands shaking as he held a cup of cold coffee. He had lost at least 20 pounds. His beard was long and unkempt, and his clothes looked like they hadn't been changed in days. But the most shocking thing was his eyes. Empty, lost, as if he had seen too many ghosts. "Dad," Arthur whispered. Edward raised his head slowly, and when his eyes met his son's, a mixture of relief and terror filled his expression. "Arthur, my son, you shouldn't have come here." "Why, Dad? Why did you do this to us?" Arthur asked, his voice breaking for the first time since childhood. "Because I'm a coward," Edward replied, tears beginning to stream down his thin cheeks. "Because I destroyed everything I ever touched and didn't have the courage to face the consequences." Lily let go of Arthur's hand and approached the bed, her big eyes fixed on the old man she had recognized on the street. "Why were you crying when you were talking to the lady with the colored hair?" she asked, with the innocent curiosity of children. Edward looked at the girl as if he was seeing a ghost. "You? You look just like my Amelia when she was little," he murmured, reaching out a trembling hand to touch Lily's face. "Amelia was my mother," Lily said simply. "She went to heaven when I was a baby." The impact of the revelation hit Edward like a punch to the gut. He buried his face in his hands and began to sob in a way Arthur had never seen in his 52 years of life. The rigid, authoritarian man who had shaped his childhood with an iron fist now crumbled before a 4-year-old child. "My granddaughter, my little granddaughter," Edward repeated between sobs. "Amelia had told me she was pregnant, but I sent her away, said I didn't want any more responsibilities." Arthur felt the world spin around him. Lily was his blood niece, the daughter of a sister he never really knew, and his father had abandoned them both to their fate, resulting in his daughter's death and his granddaughter's destitution. "Dad, what are these debts? What's this about loan sharks?" Arthur asked, trying to stay focused despite the emotional turmoil. Edward took a deep breath and began to tell a story that would destroy everything Arthur thought he knew about his family. Over the last 5 years, addicted to gambling in the region's illegal casinos, Edward had embezzled nearly $500,000 from the construction company. He sold company properties without authorization, used equipment as collateral for loans from loan sharks, and forged Arthur's signature on various documents. "The company is bankrupt, my son. The loan sharks will come after you now. That's why I faked my death, so you wouldn't be held responsible for my debts," Edward explained, his voice growing weaker. "How much do you owe, Dad?" $800,000 to 3 different groups of loan sharks. Arthur leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of 3 decades of honest work crumbling on his shoulders. The company he had built brick by brick, contract by contract, was ruined because of his own father's vices. And now he discovered he had a niece living on the streets while he lived in a mansion downtown. "Uncle Arthur, why is Grandpa so sad?" Lily asked, tugging on his pant leg. Arthur looked at the child who had turned his life upside down in a matter of days. In Lily's big eyes, he saw the same determination she had shown at the cemetery, the same brutal honesty that had exposed all his family's lies. And at that moment, he made a decision that would change the course of everything. "Dad, you're coming home," Arthur said firmly. "We're going to face this together, as a family, and Lily is going to live with us from now on." "Arthur, you don't understand. The loan sharks won't forgive this. They'll come after you, after Kate, after all of us," Edward protested. "Then we'll find a way to get the money," Arthur replied, picking Lily up. "But we're not running anymore. We're not lying anymore. And most importantly, we're not abandoning family anymore." As they descended the boarding house stairs, Arthur supporting his father by the shoulders and holding Lily's hand, he knew he was about to face the biggest crisis of his life, but for the first time in decades, he felt he was doing the right thing, even if it cost him everything he had built. The arrival at the Builder Mansion in downtown Asheville was met with a chilling silence that cut deeper than any shouting match. Catherine was on the porch when she saw her husband getting out of the pickup truck with his supposedly dead father-in-law and a dirty child in his arms. Her normally gentle brown eyes shone with a contained fury that Arthur knew well after 25 years of marriage. "Arthur Builder, what is the meaning of this?" she asked, descending the marble steps with firm strides. "First you lose your mind at the cemetery, and now you bring this child into our home without even consulting me." Lily hid behind Arthur's legs, intimidated by the imposing 3-story house and the clear hostility in the well-dressed woman's voice. Edward remained hunched over, leaning on his son's arm, looking as if he had aged 10 years in the last few weeks. "Kate, I need to explain something very important," Arthur began, but he was interrupted by the arrival of Michael Scott, his right-hand man at the construction company for 15 years. "Arthur, where have you been? 3 men came to the office this morning asking for you and your father. They said they have pending business and that they'll be back tomorrow," Michael said, breathless from running from the company to the house. Arthur's blood ran cold. The loan sharks had found out Edward was alive and would now come after the family. He looked at Lily, who was distractedly playing with her rag doll, oblivious to the approaching danger, and felt a crushing weight on his shoulders. "Michael, I need to tell you some things. Kate, please, take Lily inside and give her a bath." "We'll talk later," Arthur said, trying to maintain authority in his voice. "I'm not taking care of any child until you explain to me what is going on," Kate retorted, crossing her arms. "And why is your father alive if we buried him 3 days ago?" Edward raised his head for the first time and looked his daughter-in-law in the eye. "Because I am a cowardly man, Catherine, and because I have ruined our family's future with my addictions." The next 2 hours were the hardest of Arthur's life. Sitting in the mansion's living room, surrounded by antique furniture inherited from his grandparents, he told the whole truth to Catherine and Michael. With each revelation, the debts, the embezzlement, the fake death, the discovery that Lily was his niece, he saw his wife's face grow paler and Michael's eyes fill with despair. $800,000? Michael whispered, running his hands through his graying hair. "Arthur, that's practically our entire emergency reserve. What about the employees? We have 47 families who depend on the company." "I know, Michael. I'm trying to find a solution." Catherine had remained silent throughout the account, but now she stood up abruptly from the leather armchair and walked to the window overlooking the garden. Lily was outside, playing alone on the grass, building little houses with twigs she had found under the fruit trees. 25 years, Arthur," Catherine said without turning around. 25 years building a life by your side, believing we were a united family, that there were no secrets between us. And now I find out you have a niece who was living on the streets collecting trash while we ate off porcelain plates." "I didn't know, Kate." No one ever told me Amelia had a daughter. But you knew your father was a gambler. I saw you checking the company accounts every week, suspecting something. Why did you never investigate properly? The question hit Arthur like a slap. Catherine was right. He had noticed small irregularities in recent years, figures that didn't add up, equipment that vanished, but he had chosen to blindly trust his father instead of investigating. His emotional rigidity, which he had always considered a virtue inherited from his harsh upbringing, had become a barrier that prevented him from seeing reality. I don't know, Kate. Maybe because it was easier to pretend everything was fine. Just then, the mansion's doorbell rang. Arthur's stomach clenched as Michael went to the window and returned with a livid face. "It's them," he whispered. "3 men in dark suits. One of them has a scar on his face." Edward, who had remained silent on the sofa, began to tremble. "That's Gerald Farrell, the most dangerous of the 3 groups. Arthur, don't open that door. They're capable of anything." But before Arthur could decide what to do, they heard Lily's innocent voice from the garden. "Hi, misters. Did you come to play with me?" Arthur's heart stopped. He ran to the window and saw Lily approaching the gate where the 3 men stood. Without a second thought, he shot out the door, crossing the garden in seconds. "Lily, come here!" he shouted, but the girl was already too close to the loan sharks. Gerald Farrell, a man of about 45 with a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, looked at the child and then at Arthur with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Well, what a beautiful family," he said, his voice laced with irony. "Old man Edward's son and a granddaughter, perhaps. What an interesting coincidence." "Leave the child out of this," Arthur said, scooping Lily into his arms and backing away from the gate. Of course. We're civilized people here," Gerald continued. "We just came to collect a debt, $800,000 that your daddy owes us and our partners. My father is very sick. We need time to arrange the payment." Gerald laughed, a harsh sound that made Lily shrink in Arthur's arms. "Time? Your father already had 2 years of time. Now the responsibility has passed to you, sir. You have 1 week to get the money. And if I can't?" "You will," Gerald replied, looking pointedly at Lily. "A smart man like you always finds a way to protect his family, especially the younger family members." The threat was clear. Arthur pressed Lily against his chest, feeling rage build in his veins. But he knew any impulsive reaction could put everyone in even greater danger. 1 week, Gerald repeated, turning his back. "And tell your father that faking his own death was a very ugly move. We don't like it when our clients try to get clever with us." When the 3 men disappeared down the street, Arthur remained standing in the garden, Lily still in his arms. The girl was playing with the buttons on his shirt, completely oblivious to the danger that had passed so close to her. "Uncle Arthur, why were those men angry?" she asked, her big eyes full of innocent curiosity. "They weren't angry, little one. They were just talking about work," Arthur lied, carrying her back into the house. Catherine was waiting at the door, her face a mixture of fear and determination. "Arthur, we need to talk. Now." That night, after Lily fell asleep in the guest room, bathed, fed and wearing pajamas Catherine had bought in a hurry, the family gathered again in the living room. Michael had brought all the company's accounting books, and the papers spread across the coffee table told a devastating story. "The situation is worse than we thought," Michael said, adjusting his glasses as he leafed through the documents. "Besides the $800,000 for the loan sharks, we have other problems. Your father used company equipment as collateral for bank loans. If we don't pay on time, we'll lose the machinery." "How much time do we have?" Arthur asked. 15 days for the banks, 1 week for the loan sharks, and there's more. I found out some employees already know something is wrong. They're talking about suing the company if they don't get their salaries on time. Catherine, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "Arthur, I need to tell you something. While you were out today, I got a call. It was Eleanor." Arthur raised his head sharply. "What did she want?" She's coming back to Asheville tomorrow, and she said she has documents that prove Lily has no right to any family inheritance. She said she'll contest any attempt we make to adopt the girl. The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Arthur looked at the door of the room where Lily slept, imagining how to explain to a 4-year-old that the adults around her were willing to fight over her custody while her life was literally in danger. "Does she know anything about the debts?" he asked. "She knows," Edward answered, speaking for the first time in hours. "Eleanor always knew about my gambling. In fact, she was the one who took me to Tony the Bat's illegal casino for the first time." Another bomb dropped. Arthur felt that with every hour he discovered new secrets, new betrayals, new lies that had shaped his family for years without him noticing. In the dead of night, unable to sleep, Arthur went to the room where Lily was resting. The girl slept peacefully, hugging the rag doll, a small smile on her lips. Next to the bed was a drawing she had made with crayons that afternoon. A colorful house with 4 figures in front, a tall man, a woman, an old man with a cane, and a little girl. It was the first time in his life that Arthur truly understood what it meant to have something worth fighting for, even if it cost everything he had built. The dawn of the Midsummer Festival in Asheville brought with it the aroma of cider and cornbread rising from the historic downtown houses, mixed with the smoke from bonfires already being lit for the night's celebration. Arthur was on the porch of the mansion, watching Lily play in the garden with a new doll Catherine had bought for her, when he saw Eleanor's black SUV park in front of the gate. 6 months had passed since the fake funeral, and they had been the most difficult and transformative months of Arthur's life. The construction company had undergone a complete restructuring. He had sold the mansion and 2 valuable plots of land downtown to pay off the loan sharks, keeping only a smaller house in the Hope Creek neighborhood. Michael had become a partner in the company after investing his personal savings to save the employees' jobs, and together they had secured transparent contracts that, although smaller, guaranteed long-term sustainability. Eleanor got out of the car, accompanied by a man in a suit whom Arthur recognized as Dr. Alden Simmons, a lawyer known for taking controversial cases in exchange for generous payments. Her 58 years seemed to have turned into 70 during her time away. Her hair was completely grey, and deep wrinkles of bitterness marked her face. "Arthur," she said curtly, climbing the steps of the new house, "I've come to get what is mine by right." "Good morning, Eleanor. Please come in. Catherine is making coffee." And in the simple but welcoming living room of the new house, the tension was palpable. Lily had hidden behind the sofa upon seeing Eleanor, instinctively wary of the woman who always looked at her with hostility. Edward, who had physically recovered during the months of proper medical care, remained seated in silence, but his eyes showed a determination that hadn't been there before. "I've come to formalize the dissolution of Edward's will and contest the custody of this girl," Eleanor announced, gesturing disdainfully towards Lily. "I have documents here that prove Amelia was never my husband's legitimate daughter." Dr. Simmons opened his briefcase and handed the papers to Arthur. "Your sister-in-law was right to be suspicious. We found records showing that Amelia was registered only by her mother. There is no official paternal recognition." Arthur's blood boiled, but before he could respond, Edward slowly rose from his chair. "Eleanor, you know very well that Amelia was my daughter, and you also know that you led me down the path that nearly destroyed our family. Don't give me that repentant old man talk, Edward," Eleanor retorted, her eyes shining with an old rage. "You were always weak. You always needed someone to make your decisions for you." "That's true," Edward admitted, surprising everyone in the room. "I was weak my whole life. Weak when I abandoned a pregnant Amelia. Weak when I started gambling. Weak when I forged company documents. And weak when I faked my own death to escape the consequences." The ensuing silence was broken only by the sound of Lily playing quietly behind the sofa, humming a song she had learned at the local preschool where Catherine had enrolled her. "But there's one thing I wasn't weak in," Edward continued, walking over to where Lily was playing and picking her up. "It was in recognizing that this girl is the most precious thing our family has ever had, and I won't let you take away her chance to grow up loved." Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Edward, you no longer have any legal authority. When you faked your death, you gave up all your rights, and this child has no documents to prove kinship." It was then that Michael entered the room, carrying a folder that made Arthur's heart race. During the investigations to restructure the company, his partner had discovered something that would change everything. "Excuse me," Michael said, addressing Dr. Simmons directly. "I'm Michael Scott, accountant for Builder Construction. During the audit we conducted over the last few months, we found some interesting documents in the old files." He opened the folder and pulled out several yellowed certificates. "This is the original birth certificate of Amelia Scott Builder, registered in 1987 with paternal recognition from Edward Builder. And this," he said, pulling out another document, "is the birth certificate of Lily Scott Builder, registered in 2019 with maternal parentage of Amelia Scott Builder." Dr. Simmons's expression changed completely. He examined the documents with growing care, comparing dates and signatures. "Furthermore," Michael continued, "we found these bank deposit records made by Edward Builder to Amelia Scott Builder's account between 2018 and 2019, proving he took financial responsibility for his daughter even after years of no contact." Eleanor turned pale. "That's impossible. Edward never told me about those deposits." "Because you didn't need to know," Edward said, kissing Lily's forehead. "They were deposits made with money I earned from extra consulting work. It was the least I could do after abandoning my daughter." The final twist came when Catherine entered the room carrying a tray of coffee, but with an expression Arthur had never seen in 25 years of marriage. "Eleanor," she said, placing the tray on the center table, "it might interest you to know that we also made some discoveries about you during these months." Catherine addressed Dr. Simmons with surprising firmness. "Doctor, do you know anything about an illegal casino called Tony's Hole that operated out of the back of a mechanic's shop on the highway?" The lawyer frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't see how that's relevant." "It's relevant because we discovered that Eleanor wasn't just an accomplice to Edward's gambling," Catherine continued. "She was a partner in the establishment. She received a percentage of all the losers' money, including her own husband's." The bomb exploded in the room like a thunderclap. Eleanor went livid, her hands trembling as she tried to form a response. That's a lie," she stammered. "We have the bank records," Michael said calmly. "For 2 years, you received regular deposits from Anthony Batista, the casino owner, always on the same dates that Edward made large withdrawals from the construction company." Dr. Simmons stood up abruptly, putting his papers back in his briefcase. "Eleanor, I need to speak with you in private. Immediately." While the two talked outside the house, Arthur finally understood the extent of the manipulation his family had suffered. Eleanor wasn't just a deceived wife. She had actively orchestrated the family's financial destruction to profit from her husband's addiction. "Daddy," Lily said, tugging on Edward's shirt, "why was that lady mad at me?" Edward knelt down to the girl's level, his eyes welling up. "Because some people get angry when they lose things they think are theirs. But you don't have to worry about that ever again, my little granddaughter." When Eleanor and Dr. Simmons returned to the room, defeat was written all over their faces. The lawyer addressed Arthur with forced professionalism. "My client has decided to withdraw the custody contest and also to waive any right to the remaining assets of the Builder family." Eleanor looked one last time at Lily, who was playing peacefully in her grandfather's lap, and then fixed her eyes on Edward. "You were always a weak man, but at least now you're being weak for the right reasons." After the two left, the family could finally breathe. The sun was setting over Asheville, and the preparations for the Midsummer Festival filled the air with music and joy. Arthur went out to the small backyard of the new house and saw Lily helping Catherine light the traditional bonfire. "Uncle Arthur, look how pretty our bonfire is," Lily shouted, running towards him with her eyes shining with happiness. At that moment, watching his family gathered around the fire that symbolized renewal and hope, Arthur understood that he had lost a mansion and a financial empire, but he had gained something infinitely more valuable. He had learned the difference between rigidity and strength, between authoritarianism and leadership, between material success and personal fulfillment. Later that night, during the traditional square dance in Asheville's Central Square, Arthur danced for the first time in his life. Lily was on his shoulders, laughing as he spun clumsily in the middle of the circle of dancers. Catherine held his hand, smiling in a way he hadn't seen in years. Edward, leaning on a cane but with shining eyes, clapped along to the rhythm of the fiddle. When the fireworks lit up the starry midsummer sky, Lily whispered in Arthur's ear, "Uncle, now I understand why birds like to fly. It's because they have a family that teaches them where home is." And there, under the stars of a centuries-old festival, a family that had been lost in lies and found itself in truth celebrated not just the summer, but also the miracle of discovering that true love builds bridges where pride can only build walls. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Let me know what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.